Have you ever wondered what a hill can hold for decades while the world goes on as if nothing had happened? There are things said on that hill that have never reached the world's ears, and perhaps they will change the way you understand warning. Imagine the wind cutting through the stone paths, the distant sound of a bell, and amidst this heavy silence, whispered words among the few who saw more than they told us. Medjugorje is not just a name in headlines. It is a place where messages were delivered, where hearts were touched, and, according to some reports, 7 entire messages remain hidden, waiting for a moment or someone to reveal them. What you will discover now may surprise you. When we think of prophecies, it's easy to set reason aside and fall into sensationalism. But what if, behind the mystery, there are concrete testimonies, timid accounts, and human decisions that explain why certain words haven't reached the public? Have you ever experienced this? People who have heard may decide to remain silent out of prudence, fear, or because they believe that truth at certain times needs to be tempered by prayer and time. What if these 7 unrevealed messages weren't simply secrets guarded by mysticism, but rather intimate guidance directed to hearts and families, capable of transforming lives when understood at the right time? Stay with me until the end, because in this series, we will uncover not only what was said, but also why so many voices chose silence. I'm not suggesting ready-made theories. I'm proposing a journey of listening to accounts, comparing versions, understanding the historical and spiritual context surrounding the apparitions, and above all, perceiving the impact these messages, whether manifest or silenced, had on the ordinary people who climbed that hill in search of peace. And these are not just words. They are calls to conversion, warnings that touch faith, requests for prayer, and signs that, according to some testimonies, pointed to events that could be mitigated by human response. As we delve into the topic of the unrevealed messages of Medjugorje, let's be careful. Let's separate rumor from testimony, emotion from documentation, the desire for truth from the need for common sense. There's also a human dimension to this story. Visionaries carrying the weight of intimate experience, religious authorities pondering the right moment to speak, entire communities mobilizing in prayer. All of this forms a complex scenario in which every silence can hide a legitimate motivation. Have you ever felt that a truth was withheld to avoid panic or despair? It's precisely these kinds of questions that we'll explore without facile judgments, with respect and with the attentive gaze of those seeking answers. In the following sections, I will share stories that echo from that hill, not to fuel fear, but to provoke reflection and spiritual action. We will hear voices that claim to have received messages that have been left out of public reports, words that spoke of times of trial, of healing, and above all, of an invitation to inner change. Prepare yourself for stories that blend the intimate and the prophetic, accounts that challenge our understanding and invite us to ask, are we willing to change in the face of a warning? Stay with me, because what follows will reveal testimonies, contexts, and questions that you may never have considered and that can directly impact your life and your faith. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what resonated with you most. Share your experience, a question, or even that strange feeling you felt when you heard about saved messages. I read everything and, whenever I can, respond, because these personal conversations are what give life to this channel. When you comment, you're not just expressing an opinion. You're helping others feel less alone when faced with difficult questions. You're signaling that these stories deserve to be heard, and you're showing me which stories we should explore in more depth in the coming weeks. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. When you like the video, the algorithm understands that the topic matters and brings these narratives to more hearts that may need to hear. A warning, comfort, or a call to conversion. If you can, leave a like. It's a simple but powerful gesture. And if you want to continue following this careful investigation into the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is a clear sign that I must continue bringing you documents, interviews, and reflections with responsibility and care. All of this is done with respect and faith, and the community we are forming is precisely the place where doubts become dialogue and mystery becomes an invitation to transformation. Now, without taking our eyes off the hill, let's move on to the first testimony that holds one of the messages that almost never reached the public. You've heard the beginning of this story. A hill, the wind passing through ancient stones, and the feeling of something greater whispering in the ears of a few. Now it's time to understand the scenario that transformed those isolated voices into a phenomenon capable of moving hearts around the world. On June 24th and 25th, 1981, in that small village we now call Medjugorje, experiences reportedly occurred that would forever change the lives of 6 young locals, an event that from that moment on attracted pilgrims, changed routines, and opened doors to a spiritual journey of global impact. To understand what was said and what remained hidden, it's essential to consider the historical context at the time. It was a region marked by political uncertainty and dreams of peace. And what began as private meetings soon became the talk of town squares, churches, and doorstep conversations. The accounts of the 6 visionaries, names that became references among those seeking signs and faith, were collected, discussed, and in many cases preserved by devout communities who saw in the messages a call to inner transformation. Each year, millions of people began to climb that hill in search of prayer, healing, and an answer to deep concerns. The phenomenon took on the air of a pilgrimage, and with it took on a life of its own in the hands of those who experienced it and those who approached it in search of meaning. But why, amid so many exchanged words and so much public testimony, would we still speak of messages that did not reach the public? The answer begins to emerge when we observe that in the communications said to have been received by these visionaries, there are layers, public messages, practical guidance, invitations to prayer and fasting. And there are also what many describe as secrets or private revelations, which, according to local tradition, were entrusted to each visionary in specific numbers and times, and which were not always made public immediately. These layers are not merely transmission techniques. They reflect human decisions, pastoral responsibilities, and a mindset of spiritual protection, whether to preserve the serenity of the faithful or to allow time for communal conversion. Along this journey, choices and consequences emerge. The transformation many seek before the hill is not merely emotional. It also involves a shift in mindset and daily decisions. When someone receives an intimate word, the first decision is how to share it, immediately, filtered, or hidden. Imagine the weight of carrying a hidden truth that can alter the lives of entire families. This is the kind of behind-the-scenes experience that rarely reaches the microphones. And it is precisely in these behind-the-scenes experiences that much of the real impact lies. Private conversations between visionaries and pastors, nights of prayer that changed intentions, and revelations that, according to some reports, were softened or delayed to avoid reactions of panic or despair. These human choices are part of the narrative and show us that often silence also acts as a form of care. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the origin of the apparitions is only the first step. What really matters is deciphering the effect these messages, both public and private, had on real people. There are testimonies that speak of encounters with faith that led to profound conversions, routine changes, family reconciliations, and even life decisions that previously seemed impossible. Other accounts speak of anguish, doubt, and the need for careful discernment to separate intense emotions from lasting spiritual guidance. The journey of those climbing the hill is often a mirror of our own. There is always an invitation to introspection, a call to reassess priorities, and a pressure to decide to believe, to decide to act, to decide to transform. Words like transformation, mindset, decisions, and impact are not mere concepts here. They are practical tools that shape the experience of those seeking answers. When listening to these accounts, it's worth remembering that the investigation isn't intended to sensationalize but to understand. There are historians of the apparitions, scholars of faith, and ecclesiastical authorities who ponder the authenticity and appropriateness of disseminating these messages. At times, pastoral concern overrides the desire for transparency, generating debates that span generations of believers and researchers. And even when the community chooses prudence, this same prudence generates curiosity and a greater desire for clarity, a paradox that fuels questions and drives the search for documents, interviews, and voices that have not yet been heard. The truth is that between accounts and documents, between devotion and criticism, there is a common thread: the need to discern wisely. It's not just about accepting words or rejecting signs. It's about examining the impact these narratives have on people's practical lives. How can we transform unease into concrete steps toward inner change? How can we use revelations, public or hidden, as an impetus for a life of prayer, reconciliation, and loving action in daily life? These are the torments and lights that guide us as we unravel the layers hidden on that hill. And that's why it's worth looking not only at what was said aloud, but also at what was whispered, delayed, or kept secret. Often, the true calling lies between the lines, in that which requires a change of mindset to be fully understood. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding that the core of the messages shared in Medjugorje focuses on prayer, peace, fasting, and penance is to grasp the foundation upon which all local spirituality was built. A simple yet powerful foundation that many know and feel resonate in their hearts, even without ever having climbed that hill. Prayer as a daily dialogue, peace as an inner fruit that sustains us in difficult decisions, fasting as a discipline that transforms body and spirit, and penance as an honest recognition that we need to change. This accessible and direct language has been repeated by visionaries, pilgrims, and pastors as a path of continuous transformation. These are words that unleash confidence, guide the mind toward a mindset of conversion, and at the same time prepare us for something that goes beyond what is easily seen and heard. If this is what we're told to live by, what lies behind closed doors? This question isn't an empty provocation. It sparks our curiosity and puts us in a state of anticipation, ready to realize that what has already been revealed is part of a larger narrative. The core's strength lies in its universality. Prayer, peace, fasting, penance, these are practices that touch the daily lives of anyone, regardless of faith, culture, or background. And it is this universality that lends credibility to what later emerges. What is kept hidden, what is only shared in moments of profound silence or in carefully discerned contexts. And it is precisely at this intersection between what is open and what remains secret that transformation occurs. Think about it. Those who hear the call to pray, to seek peace, to fast, begin to navigate from action to reflection, from emotion to awareness. And it is from this awareness that it becomes possible to receive and at times endure more delicate revelations, testimonies that shake the very fabric of individual and community mentality. It's not about hiding, but about preparing, Peace only truly blossoms when it has depth. Prayer gains meaning when it makes us question what lies behind the ritual. Fasting elevates itself when it inspires courageous decisions. Penance becomes a bridge to real healing, not just symbolic. This journey, this silent impact, is part of what many call the backstage of the apparitions. A space where faith grows cautiously, where hidden truth is not revealed all at once, but offered in its own time. Each time a visionary shares a public message, there is a context, a spiritual preparation, a perception of impact. And behind this, some reports say there are private moments, prayers, tears, nighttime meditations that don't reach the microphones because they know that a single word can shake not only hearts, but entire structures of communities. The guardian mentality, which understands the power of words, expresses itself precisely in this decision to reveal with care. It's like teaching a child patiently, step by step, so that they understand the values before exposing what might accelerate or confuse their development. This care is a form of respect, but also of responsibility. And this is where the fertile ground for unrevealed messages is formed. Spiritual reserves, so to speak, that only become accessible when the inner terrain is prepared to receive the weight of the revelation. And this brings to light the true invitation of this story. It's not just about discovering what lies behind closed doors. It's about asking ourselves if we're building a sufficiently solid foundation in our own lives. If prayer, peace, fasting, and penance are not just words, but transformative practices that prepare us for something greater, for a hidden truth that requires discernment to be embraced. The journey is not easy. It requires courage and clarity, but it is precisely this clarity that can lead us to coherent decisions which shape not only our spirituality, but also our way of looking at others, at the world, at what has yet to be said. And in this search, we begin to notice how each publicly spoken phrase gains texture when we know there's something more behind it. This ignites a flame of inner inquiry. I want to understand. I want to reflect. I want to perceive the behind the scenes of these revelations, because often the impact lies not in the spectacle, but in that restrained voice, in that silent prayer that precedes the word, in that penance that opens the heart to receive something that, if exposed all at once, could crush rather than liberate. Now, the hill is no longer a distant place, but a symbol of layered transformation, and each layer released carries a price and an awareness. If the vibrant core of the messages motivates us, the hidden part demands that we pause, reevaluate our posture, adjust our mindset, and become capable of embracing what might otherwise unbalance us. Revelation calls, but silence prepares the ground. And in this dialogue between what has been given to us and what is hidden lies the power of a spiritual journey that is not limited to the visible, but reaches the invisible, the inner self, that which transforms from the inside out. Comment: here, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. To understand the idea of the secrets in Medjugorje, we must first accept that this is not a random structure, but an internal logic, a strategic arrangement of warnings and revelations that the visionaries themselves describe as 3+7. In simple terms, the first 3 parts function as initial warnings or signs intended to draw the attention of those living near that hill. Then come the 7, stronger and more far-reaching, which speak of consequences, trials, and reportedly events that could affect large populations. This division is cited in sources linked to the phenomenon itself and helps explain why some messages were published and others were not. Think of it as a chapter-by-chapter narrative, where the first acts serve as preparation. The first 3 secrets, according to various testimonies, are like warning signs and immediate guidance. For the local community, they act as a call to conversion, prayer, and a change of mindset among those who directly experience the apparition. The 7 subsequent messages in the traditional description contain denser content, events, possible admonitions, and even possible chastisements that will affect humanity more broadly if there is no consistent change in collective behavior. This structure not only heightens the narrative tension, but also explains why keeping a message can be understood by some as an act of pastoral prudence, a decision that involves discernment about impact and timing. There are also accounts that provide intriguing details about how this information was handled between the visionaries and local authorities. Some visionaries received different numbers of secrets. Others, according to the narratives, were entrusted with the entirety in forms that were not immediately comprehensible or even recorded in words that could only be read by those chosen for the mission. Mirjana, for example, is mentioned in several sources as the one who received a written scroll containing the secrets, a document that, they say, cannot be interpreted by anyone and whose full purpose still remains shrouded in mystery. This behind-the-scenes dimension, the scroll, the careful entrusting of it to specific hands, the timing, explains the existence of a hidden truth that, according to believers and scholars, will only be revealed when the spiritual and historical conditions are deemed appropriate. Another important layer of this story is how the community and the faith itself react to the knowledge that secrets are about to be revealed. In many accounts, there are mentions of the intention to prevent panic, to protect the conversion process, and to allow personal transformation to occur before a public announcement that could generate confusion. This leads us directly to the topic of decisions. When someone decides not to disclose something, no matter how shocking it may seem at first glance, that decision is born from assessments of the social and spiritual impact. It's a choice that combines prudence and responsibility, and from the perspective of those who keep it, aims to preserve the possibility of repentance and collective change before any announced plan is consummated in a traumatic way. This type of reasoning reveals the behind-the-scenes nature of a pastoral ministry that is concerned not only with information, but with its human consequences. There is also a dynamic dimension to this narrative, the very evolution of the secrets over time. Some testimonies report that certain aspects were attenuated or mitigated by people's prayer and fasting, suggesting that the interaction between collective prayer and future events is an integral part of what these messages presuppose. In other words, the revelations do not function merely as immutable predictions. In many accounts, they respond to human behavior and conversion, placing the responsibility for decisions and personal transformation on the shoulders of each believer. This idea that active faith can intervene in the course of events is both a source of hope and great seriousness, as it implies that the real impact of these messages depends on concrete changes in people's behavior and mindset. But why, after all, 7 messages? Numerology and symbolism often intersect in this type of narrative. The number 7 has biblical and symbolic resonance in many spiritual traditions, referring to wholeness, judgment, and the completion of cycles. By dividing the final warnings into 7 parts, the narrative gains a rhythm that moves from warning to culmination, a progression that increases tension and the sense that a significant outcome is at stake. On a practical level, this structure also allows for the possibility of progressive mitigation. If the conversion is real, each of the 7 items can, in theory, be softened by human response, which reaffirms the centrality of personal transformation. As the key to changing collective destinies, it is a logic that combines prophetic message with a profound ethical call. As we delve into these layers, it becomes clear that the narrative of secrets operates on multiple levels. It fuels curiosity, naturally, but also invites serious reflection on what it means to live a faith that transforms decisions and mindsets. Rather than seeking only the spectacle, it's worth asking how these revelations, both public and private, have influenced families, communities, and spiritual leaders. What practical impacts have emerged from the simplest guidance, prayer, peace, fasting, penance, and how these acts of faith have shaped a collective response to greater warnings. The journey between what is spoken aloud and what remains hidden invites us to look behind the scenes of the apparitions. There, amid prayers and human choices, lie the revelations that test both the courage and wisdom of those who receive them. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding why some messages never reach the public involves carefully examining human motivations, the pastoral context, and the practical consequences that a single spoken word can provoke. This isn't about fueling conspiracy theories, but about recognizing that in many situations, silence is a deliberate decision, born of protection, prudence, social impact assessment, and even compassion. When we speak of protecting visionaries, we're talking about people who have gone through difficult, intimate, and transformative experiences. Some report that visionaries received instructions that could emotionally overwhelm an entire community if shared without preparation. According to accounts recounted by pilgrims and those who attended certain encounters, there were nights when visionaries chose not to read aloud what they received for fear of causing distress or misunderstanding among family and neighbors. Choices motivated not by fear of being discredited, but by concern for the emotional well-being of those around them. Pastoral discernment is another layer that explains much of what happens. Religious authorities, parish priests, and spiritual directors ponder when to make information public, analyzing factors such as the community's spiritual maturity, potential repercussions, and the need for theological contextualization. There is testimony gathered from conversations with those present at meetings and hearings that suggests pastors have even recommended that certain phrases be timed or even accompanied by pastoral guidance so that they are not interpreted literally or alarmingly. This is a stance born of responsibility. A bishop or spiritual guide has a duty to protect the flock, not only from what confuses, but also from what could lead to hasty decisions. Social and economic impact also enter the equation. It's no exaggeration to think that a message announcing serious warnings could have practical consequences, such as mass panic, disruption of activities, or even migratory movements in small communities. In areas where life revolves around small local economies, rumors and predictions can have direct effects on commerce, social services, and the basic functioning of society. There are reports, often told by residents and volunteers on pilgrimages, of rumors that have circulated and nearly destabilized entire communities. Therefore, many voices who had access to more sensitive messages chose to calibrate their dissemination, seeking to avoid an uncontrolled social impact that could cause more suffering than good. The fear of panic is a real and legitimate concern. In context of intense faith, strong words can be interpreted as imminent signs of catastrophe, generating currents of fear that spread quickly. Considering that prophetic messages can be interpreted in multiple ways, spiritual leaders and even community members sometimes prefer to hold back on their announcement until there is sufficient theological and pastoral clarity to guide people. In recounted testimonies, some leaders stated that calm and patience were chosen to prevent the announcement from becoming a trigger for extreme actions, which highlights a mindset focused on collective care, even when it means temporarily withholding a hidden truth. There are also situations where messages are reserved for specific moments, occasions when it is believed that historical time, spiritual maturity, or the global situation justify revealing sensitive content. In these cases, timing is seen as a way of respecting people's freedom and responsiveness. Revealing something before the right time could generate a reaction contrary to the message's purpose, while waiting can allow for a more mature and transformative reception. Some reports indicate that visionaries and spiritual advisors considered this strategy as a way to maximize the positive impact of the revelation, trying to ensure that, when made public, the message would be deeply understood and relevant to people's real lives. Behind the scenes, there are also natural conflicts and tensions between those who prefer immediate transparency and those who advocate prudence. This human friction, accounted for by people close to the communities, shows that decisions about disclosure are not homogeneous. They are the result of debates, long prayers, and consultations. On some occasions, what became public was the result of consensus. On others, silence was maintained by a majority or by a cautious stance of leaders who preferred to postpone. The fact that there are multiple voices involved makes the issue even more complex. Visionaries, lay faithful, priests, bishops, and scholars can view the same word from different perspectives, each influenced by their responsibility, their theological understanding, and their concern for the real impact on the community. By examining these hypotheses, protection of seers, pastoral discernment, social and economic impact, fear of panic, and reservation for specific moments, we begin to recognize a human pattern. The message is not simply a prophetic utterance, but a reality that interacts with lives, structures, and decisions. Hidden truth, then, is not necessarily a conspiratorial secret. It may rather be an ethical choice made by those who hold information they consider too burdensome without proper preparation. And this choice has practical consequences. It shapes how the community reacts, how faith develops, and how individual and collective decisions are made based on a call that sometimes arrives in stages. There are also accounts that deserve critical attention. People who said they encountered resistance when trying to publish full versions of certain messages, others who claim to have seen parts watered down for pastoral reasons, and still others who recall entire nights of prayer for clarity. Recounting these experiences is not to affirm their indisputable veracity, but to open space to understand the complexity behind the scenes. This complexity calls us to a mindset of discernment, to investigate carefully, to listen to multiple voices, to assess impacts, and, above all, to realize that behind every silence there may be a human intention, sometimes flawed, sometimes compassionate, to protect, guide, or prepare. And so, by exploring these motivations, we see that the question isn't just why hide. It's also, what do we intend to protect and for what purpose? The answer isn't simple, but it contains elements that speak of responsibility, legitimate fear, and a deep pastoral concern. These factors, combined, form the practical reason why some messages haven't reached the public, or have reached them only fragmentarily. And it's at this point that our investigation gains depth, understanding not only the content of the messages, but the reason for their human management, with all the tensions, dilemmas, and decisions that this entails. Comment, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and to do so, I'll bring you 3 accounts from behind the scenes, narratives that weave the fabric of this hill with threads of mystery, human care, and a quiet urgency. These aren't journalistic expositions of official documentaries. They're respectful recreations of stories told by those who climbed the stone steps, felt the wind cut their faces, and heard words that changed the course of their lives. Smell the scent of incense that lingers in the air as I present these episodes to you. Imagine the sound of footsteps on ancient stone, the creak of a wooden door in the distance, and the breathless silence that precedes a revelation. All of this forms the sensory landscape where small, big decisions unfold, where hidden truth meets real faces and choices. The first account concerns a warning that came with a deadline, a message that, according to the narrator, sounded like an urgent call to conversion. The scenes are recreated: a cold night, moonlight beating down on the stones, and a visionary who, upon returning home, carries in his gaze the gravity of a word that should not, at that time, be widely disseminated. Change now would have been the central line, not as a threat, but as a call with a deadline. People who heard this account speak of family gatherings transformed in a few weeks, marriages re-evaluated, relationships restored, prayer routines established with unprecedented intensity. The power of this warning was so great that some spiritual advisors chose to soften it for the public, fearing that the literalness of the deadline would generate hysteria in vulnerable communities. The real impact, they say, was palpable. Where there was sincere adherence, the internal transformation was rapid. Where there was disbelief, the same old mentality persisted. Here we see the tension between the sense of urgency which drives decisions and the responsibility to measure the reach of a word so that it provokes change and not panic. The second account describes a vision of catastrophe that, according to the voices who told the story, was eventually softened. Picture the scene. A group gathered in the shadows, candles flickering, and a story interrupted by sobs as the description reaches images of devastation. Some who followed this narrative swear that, after prolonged prayers and collective fasting, the course of what had been seen was altered, not necessarily reversed but softened. This idea that prayer can intervene in the course of events is, for many, the heart of practical faith, the belief that human decisions and spiritual attitudes have real impact. In the account, there were nights of vigil in which entire communities cried out for mercy, and gradually testimonies of relief began to arrive. Less fierce winds, conflicts that did not escalate, small signs of hope where ruin was expected. Telling this story is not celebrating a miracle displayed as a spectacle. It is considering the possibility, unsettling and comforting, that the human and collective response had real weight over what had been announced as possible. The third account is intimate, almost domestic, a message about families and forgiveness that never made it to the pages of newspapers. Imagine a simple room, the distant sound of a radio, and the voice of someone sharing that they received, in a private conversation, a short, direct word: forgive. That word, repeated in different tones, transformed routines, overturned old hurts, and prompted decisions that echoed for generations. Some say that after this encounter, children returned to visit aging parents, feuds were buried in humble dinners, and couples resolved, in the details of everyday life, to renew agreements that seemed impossible. This intimate message, by its nature, was handled with extreme care. Disclosing its full content could expose personal stories, wounds, and contexts that only heal with time and respect. Here, the hidden truth acts as a reserved balm, not through manipulation, but to protect human dignity, because some revelations have direct consequences for relationships that depend on discretion and a gradual healing process. These three accounts, even when recounted cautiously, reveal a common logic: the interplay between content perceived as sacred and the human responsibility to manage it. The journey between the visible and the hidden is made up of decisions, moral calculations, and, at times, dilemmas with no obvious solution. On the one hand, the idea of transparency attracts those seeking clarity and justice. On the other, the protective mentality appeals to compassion and a sense of care for fragile hearts. Behind the scenes, then, there are nights of debate, consultations, tears, and prayers where the practical impact of each word is weighed. Revelation can heal, but it can also wound, and this requires a realistic assessment of the social, economic, and emotional context in which the message will land. This is why some words were filtered, toned down, or delayed, not out of disdain for the truth, but out of a human attempt, imperfect yet often compassionate, to manage the consequences of this hidden truth. By following these narratives, we realize that what's at stake is more than the content of the messages. It's how the community responds, how the collective mindset adjusts, and what decisions emerge from this clash between the divine and the human. The transformation many seek comes not only from raw revelation, but from the process of acceptance that precedes and follows it. The prayer that prepares, the penance that corrects, the dialogue that rebuilds. Revelations, therefore, function as catalysts, able to ignite or illuminate, depending on the wisdom with which they are managed. And it is in this space of tension, where hidden truth and human care meet, that the hill continues to hold. Stories that challenge our understanding and call us to concrete decisions for inner change. Now, without ending the conversation, I invite you to reflect on your own response to something that could shake up your life. What decision would you make? Comment, "I'm on that journey too." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, we also need to hear the voices of the authorities and the visionaries themselves, not to end the debate, but to understand how public evidence intertwines with what remains hidden behind the scenes. Documents and testimonies have been made public over the decades. Some visionaries have spoken openly about receiving secrets, and pages compiling messages and chronologies show that certain information exists in official records kept by communities and those closest to the events. These public sources help lend credibility to the narratives because they are not just rumors passed down in whispers, but accounts echoed in recognizable records and chronologies. Among the most frequently cited examples is Mirjana herself, who described receiving a scroll containing the messages and, according to published accounts, was instructed to choose a priest to make the secrets public when the time for revelation arrived. There are pages detailing this symbolic moment, the image of the scroll, the choice of a spiritual confidant, and it is here that we see the concern with the chain of custody of the message. It is not only the content that matters, but also who holds it, how it should be interpreted, and in what context it should be announced. This type of document and testimony offers a bridge between what was experienced intimately and what can be presented to the community in official terms. Another point that frequently appears in public sources is the narrative that prayer and fasting had a concrete impact on potentially serious events. There are statements and texts that claim that at certain moments, intense requests for prayer and collective penance mitigated a threat announced in one of the messages. This claim, delicate and steeped in faith, is used by many believers as evidence that the messages are not merely stagnant predictions, but dynamic invitations to transformation that can alter historical trajectories when responded to in communion. When these accounts are presented in documents and testimonies, they gain weight because they link popular spirituality to tangible effects perceived by entire communities. It is important, however, to contrast these publications with the Church's institutional position. In recent years, there have been formal steps toward regulating and providing a framework for devotion surrounding the phenomenon, recognizing the spiritual fruits without, however, declaring the authenticity of all supernatural claims. In 2024, for example, the Vatican authorized the devotion and recommended prudence in interpreting the messages, emphasizing that the focus should be on the experience of faith and spiritual fruits, while more rigorous evaluations and theological discernment would continue. This institutional position reveals an important balance, recognizing that something is happening there, that there is impact, pilgrimages, and reports of transformation, but at the same time, avoiding statements that go beyond the realm of prudent theological discernment. In practical terms, this dialogue between public evidence and hidden secrets creates clear ethical and pastoral tensions. When a public document records the existence of a secret and another voice asserts that prayer lessened a foretold evil, leaders and believers face decisions. Making everything public could be seen as a right to transparency. Remaining silent could be interpreted as pastoral care. Sources that link written records, such as chronologies and archived messages, to oral testimonies, accounts of those who saw changes after vigils and fasts, provide material for a debate that is not only theoretical, but also profoundly practical, as it impacts the daily lives of believers and the communities that organize around that faith. Also, noteworthy is the role of specific figures who have publicly taken positions on the management of this content. There are documents that mention priests chosen to occasionally announce secrets. There are chronologies that show apparitions reduced to annual meetings for some visionaries, and there are institutional voices calling for calm and study. These actors, visionaries, priests, scholars, and ecclesiastical authorities comprise an ecosystem of responsibility where each decision carries real weight on lives, beliefs, and the collective mind. Understanding who spoke, what was officially recorded, and what pronouncements were made helps to build a less sensationalist and more evidence-based picture. And then the question of impact arises. When public documents confirm the communication of secrets and records that prayer and fasting may have softened events, we realize that the effect is not only spiritual, but also social and psychological. Communities report behavioral changes, concrete life decisions, and a sense of collective responsibility that, according to reports, intensified after official speeches and testimonies. These practical consequences, changes in mentality, family, reorganizations, conversion choices, are a substantial part of the public archive that we can access and ponder. They allow the discussion to move beyond the realm of suspicion and into the realm of human actions, impacting real stories. At the end of this analysis, we realized that public evidence functions as anchor points. It records, attests, and sometimes guides the community on what is known and how it should be treated. What remains hidden, guarded by documents, confidences, or pastoral decisions, constitutes the zone of discernment, where intentions are tested, impacts are assessed, and vulnerable people are protected. Both spheres, the public and the private, complement each other and, together, require a mindset of responsible investigation that seeks documents, listens to witnesses, recognizes the human dimension of decisions, and evaluates the concrete impact of revelations on people's faith journeys. These are the lines along which we must continue our investigation, because only then can the hidden truth be understood in its depth, without falling into facile simplifications or empty alarmism. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and transform this mystery into something practical, into actions you can start living today without needing grand events or public confirmation. When we talk about messages, secrets, and hidden truths, behind it all lies a very direct question. How does this change your routine, your mindset, and the decisions you make every day? The answer isn't abstract. It translates into small gestures that, together, make up a journey of real transformation. The spirituality that springs from the hill isn't just content for debaters or the curious. It's an invitation to practice. Therefore, I bring here concrete attitudes inspired by the central messages many know: prayer, peace, fasting, and penance, and show how they can operate in everyday life, shaping a posture of serene vigilance and inner readiness. If something like this were to happen, would you be prepared? Start with a prayer routine. I'm not talking about long formulas, but about consistency. 15 minutes of silence in the morning, a pause to give thanks midday, a sincere supplication before bed. These are practices that sharpen perception and strengthen the mind to discern signs and decisions. Constant prayer generates a kind of inner radar. It doesn't make life problem-free, but it gives clarity to act calmly when the unexpected knocks on the door. Instead of waiting for spectacular revelations, the routine transforms small inclinations of the heart into firm actions, forgiving, seeking help, adjusting priorities. This daily discipline shifts mindset from reactive to responsible, from fearful to proactive. Examination of conscience is another simple and powerful tool. Taking a few minutes to revisit the day, identifying where I failed, where I was indifferent, and where I could have chosen love, is not self-accusation. It's course adjustment. When stories tell of people who changed after heeding a warning, what often occurred was a new pattern of examination, correction, and repeated small decisions. Transformation happens through repetition. When we choose personal truth over immediate comfort, we change habits, and those habits alter destinies. Think of it as soul maintenance, a time to calibrate intentions and align actions with what we consider essential. Family reunification has a practical and urgent impact. Messages about forgiveness and reconciliation are not abstractions. They address postponed dinners, unsent messages and phone calls that could have been made. A simple gesture like calling a relative with whom you disagreed, inviting them for coffee, humbly apologizing or accepting a request for forgiveness can trigger a chain of healing that spans generations. Many experiences whispered on the hill speak precisely of small decisions that change the course of families. The transformation that comes from these actions is concrete. It mends bonds, restores trust, and prepares the ground to face more difficult times with an already strengthened support network. Intentional fasting and practical penance also have a place here, not as punishment, but as an exercise in inner freedom. Reducing something that consumes time or resources, suspending a habit that imprisons, or offering a simple sacrifice for prayerful intention are ways to rediscover control and focus. These practices readjust priorities. They teach us to choose the essential and make room for what truly matters. In community reports, collective fasts and nights of prayer have shaped collective decisions that, according to some, have had a real impact on difficult events. On a personal level, fasting can be the tool that breaks cycles of anxiety and allows for more sensible, less impulsive decisions. There are also public and community initiatives you can embrace, forming small prayer groups, occasional vigils for specific themes, and reflective meetings with friends or your faith community. These initiatives amplify the impact of individual practices and foster a mindset of collective responsibility. When a community begins to pray together on a theme, the impact is greater. Social and practical decisions, from support for those in need to concrete actions of solidarity, are born from this. It's a practical manifestation of what the messages call for, not just private prayer, but conversion, expressed in community action with a tangible impact. Discernment is another key skill. In times of information overload, distinguishing between rumor and testimony requires calm and method. Verifying sources, listening carefully to those who were present, seeking guidance from trusted leaders, and observing the results. If a message produces peace, reconciliation, and positive change, it tends to carry authenticity. If it generates only fear, confusion, and division, it warrants caution. The mindset of those seeking to understand. The revelations must always include this practice of evaluation, because hasty decisions can transform a good intention into a real problem. This prudent stance is not fear, it is responsibility. Furthermore, make concrete choices about your information consumption. Limit exposure to sensationalist speculation, prioritize readings that provide historical and pastoral context, and always strive for intellectual honesty, admitting what is known and what remains uncertain. The journey of those who follow messages and reports requires this maturity, accepting that not everything will be clarified immediately and that the search for truth can be long but fruitful. This acceptance is, paradoxically, liberating. It removes anxiety from the demand for instant answers and restores the individual's ability to make sound decisions. Finally, practice active patience. Act without haste. Pray without rushing. Forgive without theatrics. And decide with serenity. Many of the stories that emerge from the Hill show that time and prayer have helped to soften potential tragedies, an effect that, if replicated on a micro scale in your life, can prevent unnecessary torment. True transformation rarely appears in a flash. It takes place gradually through repeated choices, coherent decisions, and a mindset that prioritizes the common good. All of this leads us to a practical question. Faced with a warning, a hidden truth slowly being revealed, what decisions would you make today to prepare your heart and your home? Revelations aren't just spectacles, they are invitations to concrete action, and how we respond defines the impact they will have on us and those around us. If this path interests you, there's a simple exercise to get you started. Choose a practice from this list: consistent prayer, a daily examination, a gesture of reconciliation, an intentional fast, or the creation of a small support group, and put it into practice for a week. Observe the internal changes, write down your decisions, and notice the impact on your relationships. This is the journey of transformation that the messages have always aimed to provoke, not a race for sensations, but a progressive shift in mindset that yields real results. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because if there's one thing this Hill teaches us, it's that discernment isn't an intellectual luxury. It's a daily practice. It's a moral skill that saves decisions and prevents harm. When we deal with prophecies, testimonies, and potential revelations, we're navigating between hidden truth and public noise. So it's essential that each of us cultivate a mindset of calm inquiry, one that transforms curiosity into responsibility and emotion into clear criteria. Understand that I'm not asking you to become an expert overnight. I'm only asking that you adopt simple, firm habits that protect your inner peace while increasing your understanding. They are practical tools that help separate rumor from report, sensationalism from testimony, and allow the transformation we seek to be sustained by wise decisions. Start by understanding that information comes in layers and that not every account carries the same weight. The first rule, and perhaps the most practical, is to check sources. When someone claims to know a secret message or a revealed secret, ask, where was this recorded? Are there documents, recordings, or reliable eyewitnesses? Is there an institution or person of recognized authority who corroborates the occurrence? Seeking this confirmation isn't cold skepticism. It's concern for the community and the impact a piece of news can have on people's lives. Next, prioritize direct testimonies. Accounts from those who lived the experience, those who climbed the hill, those who were present at vigils and meetings, always evaluating coherence and consistency between testimonies. Eyewitness accounts, when multiple and aligned, tend to carry more credibility than messages that emerge solely on social media. Be wary of sensationalism, news stories that insist on ready-made formulas. This will destroy everything. A secret the world needs to know often target audiences more than truth. When a narrative overly appeals to fear or extreme curiosity, without providing any basis, it's a red flag. The intention may be emotional manipulation, not responsible information. At this point, listen carefully to your own reaction. If your first sensation is panic, ravenous curiosity, or consuming urgency, take a step back and breathe. Rational and spiritual filters are essential ingredients for sound decisions. Seek trusted pastoral guidance. Talking to someone experienced in spiritual guidance, a priest, a spiritual director, or a recognized community leader, is not blind submission. It's asking for light to interpret and apply a given testimony to your life. Qualified guidance helps translate hidden truth into ethical practice without manipulation or hasty interpretations. And always observe the fruits. The practical question that should guide any evaluation is this: does this information generate peace, reconciliation, charitable actions, and responsible personal transformation, or merely fear, confusion, and division? A message that produces positive fruits tends to be more aligned with a genuine call to change mindsets and behaviors. Now, a practical resource you can repeat out loud when you come across news that seems extraordinary. Repeat it after me like a mini verbal checklist. Check sources, prioritize direct testimonies, distrust sensationalism, seek pastoral guidance, and observe fruit. Saying this out loud helps create a mental habit. It transforms an abstract principle into a practical command that can curb impulses and guide decisions. It's a simple but effective technique, creating a small ritual of evaluation before sharing, accepting, or making decisions motivated by a piece of news. In addition to these measures, think in terms of impact and collective responsibility. When you decide to share information without checking it, you're participating in the construction of a narrative that can alter other people's decisions, impact communities, and even affect local economies. Considering the practical impact of your own actions is an exercise in spiritual and social maturity, an exercise in compassion that prevents rumors from turning into panic. And on the other hand, when you investigate calmly and share with discretion, you're offering the community a genuine service. The simplicity of being well-informed helps create a healthier collective mindset, capable of transforming concern into coherent action. Also, remember to take care of your emotional health during this investigative journey. The search for revelations can stir deep-seated fears. Alarming news tends to amplify anxiety and lead to hasty decisions. Practices such as conscious breathing, limiting exposure to alarming content, and maintaining spiritual routines, prayer, silence, meeting with trusted friends, are antidotes that preserve clarity for discernment. The transformation we desire should not cost us our peace of mind. Rather, it should consolidate it so we can act with lucidity. It's equally useful to adopt a personal verification procedure. Write down the origin of the news, the sources cited, any contradictions observed, and the reasons why something seemed dubious to you. This record doesn't need to be formal. It can be a notepad on your phone. The simple act of writing clarifies thoughts and reduces the propensity for reactive decisions. Then, discuss this note with a trusted person, preferably someone with training or experience in critical reading, and compare impressions. Dialogue is a powerful tool for fine-tuning perception and reducing the risk of manipulation. As you apply these practices, keep in mind that the search for truth is not a competition for exclusive information, but a shared journey aimed at well-being, transformation, and coherence. Hidden truth, when it emerges, demands inner preparation, community wisdom, and responsible decisions. There's no rush to confirm everything now. There's a willingness to investigate calmly, protect vulnerable people, and act for the common good. This balance between moral urgency and practical consideration is what differentiates legitimate denunciation from empty spectacle. Finally, learn to accept uncertainty as part of the journey. We won't always have definitive answers, and that's okay. Spiritual life, like any journey of transformation, requires patience, humility, and a mindset that accepts growth step by step. The truth, when finally made public, must find prepared hearts and communities capable of transforming revelation into charitable action. Until then, each person's role is to exercise discernment, consider the impact, and make decisions that build peace, reconciliation, and social responsibility. Right there. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, the hill held out of love or prudence, and it's up to us to listen to what still echoes in our hearts, to try to decipher what it means to carry a heavy message and, at the same time, to offer light where there is doubt. Consider for a moment the image of that hill, stones worn by time, footsteps returning home with changed eyes, candle flames casting long shadows on the walls of an ancient chapel. In these shadows circulate human decisions, clashes of conscience, and a set of behind-the-scenes events that rarely make the headlines but shape destinies. It's not just about prophetic content. It's about how hidden truth interacts with people's concrete lives. Little children who grew up listening to warnings, couples who reconciled at the dinner table, communities that changed their priorities because of a word received in silence. When we speak of transformation, we're not imagining a spectacular event. We're talking about habits that change, mentalities that realign, daily choices that, combined, have a profound impact on the individual and collective journey. There is something profoundly human in this blend of revelation and protection. Those who choose to withhold a message do so bearing the weight of responsibility and the anguish of uncertainty. This dynamic challenges our understanding of authority, the role of pastoral care, and the maturity of the community receiving an announcement. In some cases, silence serves as a protective space for families to process their pain without public exposure. In others, it is an invitation for conversion to happen first in private before moving crowds. This interplay between the private and the public is ambivalent and therefore requires a mindset of discernment and empathy. We cannot reduce everything to theories or accusations. We must understand the motives, emotions, and decisions that led to the timing of certain messages. And to understand this is to recognize that revelations, when managed with care, can produce real fruits, reconciliations, charitable initiatives, shifts in priorities, and a faith that translates into concrete actions in daily life. At the same time, we cannot ignore the risk of human arbitrariness. Misguided decisions or misguided motivations can block transparency and generate distrust. There are fine lines between protecting and concealing, between preserving peace and denying the right to information. This dilemma requires honest leadership, clear processes, and a community capable of holding itself accountable without rancor, with responsibility and serenity. When leaders act with integrity, decisions not to disclose something become understandable because they are made to avoid greater harm. When they act out of fear or self-interest, silence becomes a problem. Therefore, responsible investigation, which seeks documents, interviews, and context, is essential. It does not aim to delegitimize faith, but to clarify motivations and assess impacts so that the hidden truth is treated with the same seriousness with which any matter affecting collective life would be treated. Imagine, then, the practical impact this would have on your life. If a message contains a call for forgiveness, how different would your week be if you decided to make a simple gesture of reconciliation? If a secret points to the need for fasting and prayer, what new priorities would emerge in your routine? The transformation requested in the messages is not abstract. It is operative. It requires decisions to forgive, to seek dialogue, to adjust, spending, to dedicate time to prayer and examination of conscience. These decisions, made with courage and constancy, change our attitude toward the world and prepare our hearts to receive greater revelations without panic and with discernment. The protective mindset that sometimes justifies silence will only make sense if it is accompanied by a mindset of preparation. If the communities and individuals who listen become more capable of acting with charity, wisdom, and social responsibility. Behind these stories are ordinary people whose lives were touched in small and profound ways. A farmer who began praying every morning and saw his family grow closer. A teacher who, after a warning carefully addressed, decided to dedicate time to listening to struggling students. A mother who found the courage to forgive an old resentment. These stories, though simple, reveal the everyday impact of these messages. When put into practice, it's not about thunderous miracles around every corner, but about the slow construction of a culture of care and conversion that over time changes mindsets and produces more compassionate and resilient communities. It's also important to recognize the role of collective responsibility. Decisions about disclosure aren't exclusively individual. They involve structures, authorities, and traditions. When the community participates in the discernment process, listening, evaluating the results, and dialoguing with leaders, decisions tend to reflect a balance between transparency and prudence. The investigative journey we propose isn't a hunt for secrets out of morbid curiosity. It's a path that seeks clarity, responsibility, and practical application. We want to understand how revelations influence the social fabric, how they shape behaviors, and what concrete consequences they have on real people. That's why looking at the hill also means looking at what happens in homes, workplaces, schools, and public squares. Finally, the question that remains is as simple as it is profound. If you could hear a single truth hidden in the hill, what would you want revealed? This question isn't a request for spectacle. It's an exercise in prioritization, an opportunity to reveal what we most need to change. Perhaps it's a call to forgiveness, perhaps guidance to better care for our family, perhaps a plea to change habits that hurt ourselves and others. The answer to this question says a lot about your own journey of transformation, about the mindset you carry and the decisions you're willing to make. By asking this question silently, you begin to discover that often what we most need to hear is already echoing within us. It's just a matter of listening carefully and responding courageously. Comment: this makes sense to me. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you for exploring these stories. It already says a lot about your desire to understand and transform. If this content brought clarity or touched something within you, consider subscribing to the channel. Here I bring research, testimonials, and reflections that help transform curiosity into action. And your subscription is the simplest way to ensure we continue this investigation with responsibility and care. If you want to let me know you've reached the end, write in the comments. I'm with you until the end. I'll carefully read the messages that arrive this way. And if something resonated with you today, leave a like. It's a small gesture, but it shows that the connection we've built here makes sense and deserves to be deepened. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and stay with me there so we can continue to uncover the behind the scenes, the sources, and the human decisions behind the messages. Thank you for being on this journey. We're in this together.